So I want to say that I can't discuss everything about Hadith and Sunnah in this video in depth. I can only touch on some nuances, but I will recommend further deep individual research about it. So in Arabic, Sunnah literally means a path, a way, a normative practice people follow. So within Islamic tradition, I won't use the word Islamic because Islamic often functions as a legitimizing shortcut. Because once something is labeled Islamic, it is treated as divinely authorized, even when it is largely a human construction shaped by history, politics, culture, and power. So usually lots of distinctions are being blurred with the word Islamic. So I will say within Muslim communities that in the effort to obey the messenger and imitate the prophet, the Sunnah is treated as an authoritative model that Muslims have come to use for belief, worship, ethics, law, and character. And of course, the Quran equates obedience to the messenger with obedience to God. But I will argue that obedience and imitation are not synonymous. That is why the understanding of Sunnah within Muslim societies is not a monolithic. Some Muslims understand Sunnah as following the Prophet's path in terms of obeying him in the divine instruction and moral guidance he conveyed, whereas some understand it as imitation, which means they also want to replicate his habitual, cultural, and contextual actions of the messenger. Because not everything the prophet did, said, preferred is automatically a binding religious rule to be obeyed. It is common sense. And two Quranic verses came to mind, which indicate that the prophet displayed human agency in certain situations, and because some of his actions were later corrected by God. And an hadith report also came to mind, although the report exists in multiple versions across different collections of hadith. So, like, it appears slightly different in wordings and context. But this one I'm highlighting is in Sahih Muslim. So I will attach it here. So, and these are evidences that the Prophet held personal opinions. His preferences were not automatic revelation to be followed or obeyed. And it is also good to know that according to Hadith reports, companions of the Prophet did ask for clarification as they understood the distinction between his role as a messenger delivering the divine revelation and his role as human with personal preferences. So, and the questioning and clarification was never seen as a lack of faith, but rather as a desire to understand the nature of the command so that they could fulfill it correctly and they won't find themselves dancing to the whims of human. Because the prophet's life falls into different categories. Some of his actions reflected the lived reality of 7th century Arab culture that he lived. The prophet had personal preferences. He had likes, dislikes in terms of food, the way he sleeps. So he made decisions that were context specific. And of course, some of his actions were religious guidance made to be followed as a form of worship, ethics, and even justice. And I will say that if you look around at how Sunnah is being practiced, it is a form of obedience to ideology. It is because if you look at it, it is a specific version of what the sectarian leaders promote as Sunnah is what members obeyed or obey as Sunnah. So if you look around, you will see. So in summary, Sunnah is not a monolithic concept in the Muslim world. So we understand it differently. So, and the second part of the question is about what are narrations and where did they come from? So, when people say narrations, it means are these narrations. So, these narrations are claims of things said, did, approved by the prophet or even the companions. And these narrations were transmitted by people after his death. So, this is not revelation from God. It is human narration about the prophet. So, because when the messenger of God was alive, people who heard him, watched him, and asked questions were called companions. And historically, it is reported that some of these companions did keep personal notes of things they claimed to have heard from the messenger of God. But But none of these original notes survived physically during Hadith's compilation period. So what only survived were oral transmissions claimed to be from those notes, transmitted through people who claimed to have met these companions, not from the notebooks themselves. So Hadith collections are not copied notebooks. They are oral narrations of things ascribed to the prophet. So let me say it goes like this, like narrated by X, who heard it from Y, who heard it from Z, and Z, who heard it from a companion, or got it from a companion's note who claimed to have heard it from the prophet. So usually that is how those narrations go. So the fragile nature of Hadith as a concept made it porous to fabrications after passing of the prophet. So there was mass transmission of narrations attributed to the prophet, especially when politics intensified between companions. So the companions fought wars between themselves. Yes, Muslims fought civil wars. They splitted into sects after the death of the prophet. So, and this became a tool they used to attribute statements to the prophet. Because when all these political factions start to emerge, sectarian polemicists attributed specific sayings to the prophet to justify their leadership claims, especially when their authority was contested. So this is to show that during the time of the companions, fabrication already existed, because the companions themselves would query the transmission of this report as well. They would question how the person got a particular hadith narration. So hadith criticism did not begin today. So, and mind you, these were companions who had seen, learned, and heard from the prophet. Yet they battled with factory of hadith fabrication. So if fabrication exists back then, it certainly did not disappear later. That's the fact. So there were paraphrasing mistakes. Look at the hadith I showed the other time. So it exists in different versions. That is example of paraphrasing mistakes. So it exists in different versions. It reflects different context under different events. So, and there were fabrications. People were forgetting hadith. So what scholars did, they responded by collecting and writing down hadith narration for scrutiny. So, and I should point out that hadith collection is methodologically based. Individual scholars who collected hadith reports had their own methodology of collecting hadith reports. So it was a democratic process, and they freely criticized each other's methodology, because at the end of the day, all these reports are based on probability, because they never understood hadith usage the same way we make it as co-equal to the Quran. The whole fabrication dilemma is what birthed hadith science in Islamic scholarship. So hadith science is a human effort that exists to scrutinize the chain of transmissions and content of report ascribed to the prophet. That is why hadith gradings like authentic, weak, good, fabricated exist. So, and these gradings are not neutral. It is theologically framed. What one theology grade as authentic may not be graded as authentic by another theology. Yes. So that is that about hadith. And this is my own final input, and what I find troubling is that despite hadith unreliability, Muslims have come to heavily rely on it as a prophet sunnah. And another thing is that lines are being blurred, in that hadith and sunnah are always used interchangeably to mean the same, which they are not. And scholars participate in blurring these distinctions as well, which is why I said in my video that as Muslims, we should find a sunnah of the prophet within ocean of hadith reports that exist. So we have to use the Quran as central, not make hadith as co-equal to the Quran. Yeah, because if anything divinely will be attributed to the prophet within hadith, it should align with Quranic ethos. So the Quran is the only preserved divinely guaranteed revelation. So everything else must be measured against it, not placed not placed alongside it or used above it, because the Quran established this hierarchy itself. So we have sent down to you the book as clarification for all things. I will attach some of these verses. So nothing in the Quran authorizes granting infallibility to later transmitters and start treating probabilistic reports as binding guidance, or using hadith to override Quranic ethics. Another thing is that the prophet exists within the message of the Quran, not outside of it. So the Quran defines the prophet's role in terms of revelation. There are verses in the Quran narrating this. It judges by what is revealed. So when it comes to what is to be divine, the Quran never presents the prophet as an independent legislator who operates outside revelation. No, no. The reliability on hadith in the Muslim world is so bad that the prophet has been taken out of the Quran, and hadith is literally plastered on him. Because I posted a video the other day talking about hadith report, and someone asked if I was a Quraniya, which I asked in return that was the prophet a Quraniya, because the term Quraniya is now being used as a slur to dehumanize people and excommunicate Muslims. And when hadith narrations ascribe to the prophet statements that contradict Quranic justice and portrays him as misogynistic, or someone that is punitive or ethically inconsistent, or they use the prophet to sacralize misogyny, that is not defending the prophet's status. It is damaging it. And they know, these men know. They don't just care. Because I would say that misogynistic Muslim men refused historically until today to disentangle the Sunnah from the Hadith. They refuse to differentiate between what was the prophet's practice from the problematic historical authenticity of the Hadith. And their refusal is due to preserving male supremacy and comfort. Yeah. So, using problematic hadith reports to establish the prophet's sunnah is how misogyny became Islamic. Because from everything we see, hadith collapses under historical, cultural, political, or even theological scrutiny, which means the prophet's image collapses with them. The prophet should be anchored where Allah anchored it, which is in the Quran. That is the methodology the Quran itself recommends, not treating historical, cultural, contextual, and situational events as divine and everlasting law. So that is how patriarchy. So this is how patriarchy became. This is how the this is how the Sunnah became misogynistic. So let me know what you think in the comment section, because my mind feels suddenly blank. Yeah, let me know what you think. Thank you. Bye.